if you're manufacturing or selling products, it's a lot easier, right? I know how much this product costs. I know how much to add on top of it. And every time I order this product at this price, I can always make this profit if I charge this amount. Simple. But when you're dealing with humans, it's different. It's completely different, because you can't say to someone that you're not working with robots, right? So you can't say this is the process, and once we do this, we make this much. It doesn't work like that. So there's a complexity to that.
Welcome to the Agency Profit Podcast, a show dedicated to going deep space on agency operations, which is just as nerdy as it sounds. I'm your host, Marcel Petitpoff. I'm the CEO of Parakeeto, a firm that helps digital and creative agencies measure and improve their profitability. Join me as I interview some of the smartest thought leaders and agency owners in our space and go deep into operations, metrics, and all the other things you need to get right so you can spend less time worrying about operations and more time executing on your vision. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Agency Profit Podcast. I'm thrilled today to be joined by a friend of mine, a person that I've been chatting with every couple of months for the last few years. He's a person that every time we got on the phone, we just go deep, we nerd out. He's a veteran of the industry, worked in agency, is a chartered accountant, is now a managing partner at Cactus, and is specialized in helping agencies with finance, metrics, profitability, as well as mergers and acquisitions. So with all of that, Alfie Wenegieme, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Marcel. Appreciate it. Like you say, we've been talking for so long, and this has been in the works for ages. So thanks for having me. The day is finally here.
Amazing. And so we have spent a lot of time talking about a lot of different things. I think I recall one of our calls, we spent lots of time lamenting about all of the data problems that we inherit when we start working with new clients. We come in, they give us all their data, and it's a complete mess. And then we're asked to try and provide answers on top of this data and all of the fun challenges that we work through on this. But one of the things that you spend a lot of time, or that have spent a lot of time doing, that we don't do as much of at Parakeeto, is around training agency teams to develop that way of commercial thinking and really trying to get more people in the organization focused on these things. So that is, I think, really the topic for today, is how do we encourage agency owners and how should they be thinking about developing that commercial competency among their broader team?
I think, like you said, we've talked about this many times, right? Along with all the other things we talk about. But I think this is really important because it is the starting point for everything else. And, I don't know if you've experienced this, but a lot of agency founders either become agency founders by accident, or, it's a passion thing, and then they start the agency, but they don't really have the commercial background. And then because they don't have that background, when it comes to recruiting and building a team, they tend to find people that are right for the job. So whatever kind of agency it is, whether it's PR, web development, whatever it is, they get the people that are experts in that field, which is great, but they don't really know what to look for commercially. And then they end up with a team who, yes, they deliver the, best work, amazing product. However, they don't have that commercial side figured out. So I think as important as it is to deliver great work, because that is the basis for any business, the commercial side needs to be 100%, and this isn't always the case. So it is really important, because at the end of the day, it is a business. So regardless of how amazing your work is, if you're not generating enough revenue and making enough profits, you'll only go so far before you need to shut the doors and, it's game over. So that part of things is very important, and unfortunately it is overlooked a lot of the time. So it's either, the founders don't get it themselves, or they get it but they just don't know how to find it in people. So for me, I feel as important as it is to go in and figure out what problems that agencies have and try to fix it, I think a bigger and probably more important part of what I do is the education piece. So training the teams, and it's everyone, starting from the leadership all the way down to the junior exec, because everybody in the agency plays a role. It's not just for the founder or the leadership team to, have the commercial acumen. I feel everybody plays a role. Therefore, to a degree, everybody needs to understand, the agency model, how the agency makes money, and their role in making that happen. So that is a fundamental part of running an agency.
Brilliant. So there are a few threads that I want to dig in on here, starting with why agencies struggle with this so much and some of the common symptoms that you see when you start working with a client that underpin a lot of this lack of shared knowledge around commercial thinking, both at the leadership level, but also transitioning down into the team. What do you typically see that are the underpinning problems there?
I think with commerciality, I think the original problem is that people feel when they hear, finance or commerciality, their minds go to an accountant. That's for the accountant to do. It's not for me. I don't get it. I don't understand it. And I don't need to understand because the accountant can do it. So when I go into an agency, a lot of the time I'll ask a simple, the most basic question, which is, what is your profit margin? And sometimes they can't, the leadership can't tell me. They don't know, or they'll tell me, say, gross profit instead of net profit, or they just don't understand the concept of it. And to a huge extent, I understand. I don't expect them to be, to go get an accountancy degree or become a chartered accountant, but it is just understanding, the basis of it. But because they kind of feel that that's not something whether it's like they didn't understand, they didn't like maths in school or whatever it is, it just carries on to, present day, and they feel like that's something I don't get and I don't want to get it, So going in there, a lot of the time I see agency leaders who don't even understand, the fundamentals. So I think they're in a lucky situation where they do great work, and they charge the client X amount, and it just so happens that by luck their costs are less than what they charge the client, and at the end of the year they go to their accountant, their year-end accountant, and he tells them, oh, you made a profit, and everyone's happy, right? But they can't tell you how they made that profit, or what portion of that revenue was cost, what's the percentage. They don't know any of that stuff. So that's a huge challenge I face. So going in, first of all, like we've talked about a lot, the data and all that stuff, collecting the data from them, because they've never looked at it themselves. They don't know. So they'll pass me on to, their year-end accountant and ask him, oh, can you give Alfie the revenue figures and this, that, and the other, because they just don't know it. So I think the biggest challenge I've found is the leadership. So I'm talking the founder, the, directors, MDs, whatever, not understanding, commerciality to start with. So it makes it difficult to have certain conversations. So it's usually going in, explaining the fundamentals, telling them what I'm looking for, and then, the education piece. As we go along, telling them, what this is, why you need to track this, and then, do my whole process with them, So once the leadership team get it, then it's a lot easier for them to then say, okay, let's start working with the account directors, let's get the account managers and everybody else in. But until that part happens, it's really difficult. And I think one other thing as well is, I think agency leaders sometimes, I don't know if it's an ego thing, or, they don't want to appear to look stupid in front of their team. So they don't want to admit that they don't know, because they feel, if I'm saying, if Alfie's asking me about profit margins in front of my team and I don't know it, I don't look right. But that's really not the case. I always, say to founders, the same way you're maybe a bit uncomfortable with commerciality, I'm uncomfortable with sales or marketing or whatever else. We all have the things we're really good at and the things we're not. So just be open with me. Let's figure it out. And once you get it, we can start to educate the rest of the team. So there's a lot of barriers to get past before you can kind of educate the whole agency, but you have to start with the leadership team, and usually that's the challenge.
Hey, it's Marcel here, and I hope you're enjoying the episode so far. If you are, then I want to encourage you to check out the Agency Profitability Toolkit. It's a free set of resources that we've put together to help agency owners just like you improve their profitability. It's full of free checklists, templates, and training videos, and has helped thousands of agencies get better at measuring the essentials of their business. So if you want to grab a free copy of that, you can head to parakeeto.com/toolkit or look for a link wherever you're watching or listening to this. With that, I want to thank you again for tuning in, and I'll let you get back to the episode. Yeah, we see the exact same thing. It starts with leadership, and often there's a spectrum of understanding, right? There's, part of what you've described, which is they're not really sure what's going on. They're really relying on financial data, which, is, I think, kind of like the level zero of understanding. Like, you're looking backwards and finding out that there was a problem. There's really not much sophistication there, but it is the starting point. And then even as they develop more of an understanding, there is a big gap between understanding this well enough as a founder to, make decisions, get some context, and at a high level, get what's going on, versus understanding it well enough to your point, have the confidence to start managing down to the team or managing around to stakeholders and be able to stress test these numbers in contextual conversations. That requires a level of mastery that is a pretty big departure from having enough confidence to go into a conversation with your accountant, ask questions, and walk away feeling like you have a directional sense of what's going on. So there is a gap to close there. And the success of an engagement with somebody like yourself or with us is very unlikely to be high if after our time there is over, the management team is not able to continue to manage against the things that we've trained on. So I completely agree that it's got to start with leadership, and it has to, because it has to be informing every decision. So what are some of those core concepts when you come in, you start working with leadership and then start educating the team that you're trying to educate against? If we had to reduce this down to like the 20% of things that you got to understand to get 80% of the results, what would those be for you?
Okay. I think, first of all, it will be the agency model. So how does this agency business work, right? Because a lot of the time people tend to think something completely different. I think there's that whole desire to please the client and do this amazing work, and they forget that there's a model, there's a formula to this thing. It's not just about the top line, because you need to get certain other things right. I always say, when you compare, the agency model is a simple one, right? But the challenge and the difficult part is you're selling expertise. So you're dealing with human beings, right? If you're manufacturing or selling products, it's a lot easier, right? I know how much this product costs. I know how much to add on top of it. And every time I order this product at this price, I can always make this profit if I charge this amount. Simple. But when you're dealing with humans, it's different. It's completely different, because you can't say to someone that you're not working with robots, right? So you can't say this is the process, and once we do this, we make this much. It doesn't work like that. So there's a complexity to that. So it's understanding. I think first of all, understanding the agency model, and then after you understand that, then understand a few of the important metrics, the things you need to look out for. Again, like I said, I'm not expecting any agency leader to go out and get an accountancy degree. However, there's certain things you need to know. You need to know what the gross profit is. You need to know what your operating profit is, EBIT. You need to know what your net profit. All of these kind of things, explaining them. So the concept of over-servicing, the concept of staff utilization, all of these things, explaining it to them, getting them to understand how that feeds into the whole profitability process, that is key. And then within that, talking about things that affect the team. So, I talk about the culture as far as commerciality is concerned. So how do people see, things like pricing? Like agents, what's your method? How do you, and this is something we've talked about a lot as well, because, that's your territory as well. But so it's looking at pricing and the culture, how the team look at certain things like pricing. So you talked about you touched on something very important there, and when you said decision making. So the decision-making process is formed, I think, predominantly by the agency's culture and approach to commerciality. I've worked with different agencies where you go in there and when it comes to pricing, only the only the MD or the founder is allowed to quote prices. You go to other ones and the intern that joined yesterday is pricing work, right? So it's all different. So like explaining that and how the ideal model should be. Yes, everyone needs to feed into how you price. However, there is a level of accountability. So this is the process. This is how we come up with our prices. It's based on this, and all of that. So just to ensure that every time you price work, you're doing it a certain way and you're achieving profitability every time. So giving people the confidence to be able to make the decisions based on the knowledge that they've got of pricing is super important. So these are just some of the things I kind of, tackle when I go into agencies and try to educate them.
Yeah, it's interesting as you talk through this, like what you're shedding light on is the thing that doesn't get thought enough about. I talk to two kinds of people on sales conversations at Parakeeto. The first is the person that is viscerally aware of just how complex all this stuff can actually get, especially at scale. And the person that is blissfully naive about how complex this stuff is and thinks you can just like zap your time tracking tool into a dashboard and automate measuring all of these things, right? Like the thing that I think is so interesting is, you have these concepts that exist at the agency level that you're going to see on the P&L for the whole business or for a business unit. But you now have to find a way to translate that to the other contexts in the business. How does this apply to a given project or a client? How does this apply to a more specific period of time? And how does this apply to each individual contributor that has influence over the outcomes of a project, of a team, of a utilization rate, et cetera? And it's coming up with concepts and core principles that can apply to all of those contexts that is actually quite nuanced and quite difficult. Because, like, for example, this is a rant, and maybe we could debate about this, but I think the idea of net profitability on a project is like one of the most idiotic concepts I've ever heard in my entire life. Like, it makes no sense. It takes so much time and energy, and it's completely meaningless. But we're trying to like take this same concept that we would think about at the agency level and like push it down to the project level without thinking about the ramifications of that. And I think this is where you start to end up with all this unnecessary complexity that makes agencies dysfunctional, in that they're like coming up with a price based on this arbitrary set of like requirements that are actually not even resulting in profitability at the end of the day, because the underlying model is all disjointed. So that is I think that is the magic, the nuance of what you do, is being able to like work through every level and bridge those gaps, which is where I think a lot of the complexity traps emerge. First of all, are we aligned? Are we aligned on net profit per project? And like, how do you navigate that as you work with the team and kind of start working through the ranks of stakeholders?
Yeah. So on that point, because I've seen a post you did once about this topic, and so I agree with you and I don't agree with you. So the part of me that doesn't agree with you is the accountant part of me that really wants to see numbers. But I am completely on your side in terms of contribution, because that's what you talked about in your post. I still remember. See, I pay attention. I'm completely there with you. I would rather, for simplicity, because like you're saying about complexity and all that stuff, for simplicity, I would rather they focused on contribution, right? I can later on look at net profit, and all that stuff. But as far as the teams are concerned, contribution. Because if you were to achieve, an 80% contribution on every single project you do, and of course, you're not crazy with your overheads, like your offices aren't the most expensive and all of that stuff, you're fine, right? Agency model, again, is where your staff cost is your most expensive cost, right? So if you measure contribution, I think that's simple enough. So on that side, so I 95% agree with you and 5% not agree with you. And that 5% is just for me. So I would look at net profit only because I still need to see all the other factors, right, to make sure that they're staying on top of certain things. But again, once you track the contribution and you achieve, X amount of contribution consistently, that is fine. So yeah, so that's my answer to that.
And like it comes down to influence, right? It's like an individual contributor that like a designer on a project, they have no control over what you're spending on overheads. That's completely out of their purview. But what they do have accountability to is that contribution margin, or as we would call it, delivery margin on that individual project. The decisions they make will directly influence that number. And so that makes sense to kind of bring within the purview of the commerciality training that we do with them and really try to help them relate their day-to-day activities to that metric that ideally we can manage them to. That is a much simpler, much less complex, much more like easy to calculate metric. And I think that's really the important part of this, right?
Definitely, because, and again, it's what you say there is the control and influence. So there's no point, and that's why I said for me, the net profit bit is for me to, I need that data so I can look at it as the finance person. But for them, I'm happy for them to just focus on contribution, because again, to your point, that's the bit they can control. They have no say over what buildings we rent or what bills we pay. So as long as you, the team, can get contribution up to a certain amount, I can speak to leadership and we can sort out overheads and all that stuff, but consistently hit this contribution and we'll be fine. So yeah, I'm pretty much with you on that.
So I want to dig into some weeds here on this. And I want to start with the misconceptions that you see or the pushback that you get from teams when you go in and start working on this and start trying to like bring everybody in alignment around commerciality. What are some of those things that you hear or that you see that are kind of dysfunctions or commerciality faux pas or bad habits that often are pervasive in these agencies when you first come in?
Okay, so I'll start with one that you and I have kind of talked about, and I think it'll be an easier one because we can probably even talk about this. Is the whole, when I go into an agency and we start talking about tracking time, that is a big one, right? Because there's a split consensus on how agencies should or shouldn't be looking at timesheets and this, that, and the other. So I think time tracking and time management is a big one, because the moment I say to certain leaders, do you track time? They go, oh, yeah, no, we don't do that, blah, blah, blah. The attitude is that of like, how dare you tell me about time? And some that do, when I mention time, they go, oh yeah, we track time, but we don't bill on time. I'm like, yeah, calm down. Yeah, I'm not advising anybody to bill on time, quite the opposite, but we need that data, to analyze and track and check client profitability and staff utilization, all of that stuff. So it's small things, starting with timesheets and then going in and proposing certain things like, say, trying to get to an accurate or a reasonable utilization target for the teams, because then you've got like a breakdown of alignment, because of course the founder and me are saying, we need you to be 60%, 65, 70% billable, and then you've got pushback from people because they feel, oh, we can't achieve that, that's too high, and so sometimes there's that whole thing of, this is what is right for the agency, but trying to get everybody on board is usually a challenge, because I guess it's human nature, right? People kind of want to look out for their interests first. So that's where, again, that education piece comes in to say, no, this is what we want it for. So we're not trying to punish anyone, and we're not trying to penalize anyone. All we're saying is, do this, this, and this, and let us measure that, and then we can improve it. If you don't measure it, you can't improve it. That's how I see things. But obviously, the people that don't, agree with timesheets don't see it the same way. So, so yeah, that's an example of kind of the things I encounter when I first go in. And then once you get past it, and you get everyone on board, and you start to show, and I think this is a good thing with what you do as well, with all of, once you've got the data there, is being able to demonstrate, with numbers, what the effect of change can be, right? So if you're saying to someone, let's approach it this way, and they feel, and you get that resistance, the moment you can, get data, analyze data, come up with, a result that shows them that, once we tweak this here, this can be the outcome. And once you do this, this can be the outcome. Then it's an easier sell. And then everyone can buy into that whole approach that you're proposing. So, yeah.
Awesome. So we'll have a link to Alfie's LinkedIn. We'll have a link to the Cactus website as well. Some more information on Alfie for those of you that want to connect and keep in touch. With that, Alfie, really enjoying our conversation. I always love chatting with you. And I just really want to thank you for making the time to be on the show today, man.
I just want to say thank you for having me. Really appreciate it. This is just like one of our everyday conversations. So it's been very easygoing, and you've made it very comfortable. So thank you.